Greetings, you sexy bastards. I just had some quick morning thoughts that I thought I'd freaking share with the world. And I wrote them down, and I haven't really thought them through entirely yet, but I'm going to try to think them through here. I've thought them through a little bit, but I'm going to try to rattle off the thoughts as quickly as possible and as cohesively as possible. So today, I want to talk about the difference between gratitude and attachment. And I think somewhere in business vlog, way back, I might not have posted that video, but I know I did one where I was talking about the problem of gratitude and attachment. And it's something I've struggled with for a long time, where as a human being, when you're going through life, you want to pursue greatness, you want to achieve more things, you want to become better. But along that journey, you have to have gratitude, because if you don't have gratitude, then you're going to be depressed and angry, and you're always going to want more, and you're never going to be satisfied with the things that you have. So when you actually go and get things that you want, or achieve great things, or have things that are of high value, you're not going to be able to appreciate them, because you're so consumed with the pursuit of more. And the pursuit of more isn't a bad thing. It's what creates fulfillment. It's the journey of life. But there's also the need to have gratitude. However, there's a problem. There are two problems. One is the problem of complacency. What happens, I've seen this a lot, is people who tend to be very grateful tend to grow complacent, and then 2 years down the line, they're a hell of a lot less grateful because they've been complacent, because they've kind of they haven't taken advantage of the time that they had. Dude, this lighting in here is just not it. They haven't taken advantage of, okay, well, that's way too dark. Let's see, how's that? That's, that's okay. Anyway, they haven't taken advantage of the time allotted to them, and so they're missing out on things in life. But that's not the one we're going to talk about today. The other one that we're going to talk about today is the problem of attachment. So this is something that I've noticed in myself. I don't know, maybe other people have noticed this, experienced this, and struggled with it, or perhaps this is just a me thing. But I think what can happen is gratitude can become attachment, because you're like, oh, life ain't so great. I'm all, this and that and depressed or freaking whatever. And then you're like, oh wait, no, it is great because I have this and I have that and those things are good. And then that creates a lot of positive emotion. And then when you have that positive emotion, you essentially tie that positive emotion to those external things. And due to the fleeting nature of things, what is it the Stoics call it? The law of impermanence. Things are impermanent. They pass, they change, things go away, and then you lose them. And then if you're attached to them, you're going to suffer greatly because of it. And then even when you have it, there's this quote by Seneca that I'm constantly quoting. I think it's something like, woe to the people. It doesn't start like that, but it's like, woe to the people who work so hard their whole life for this thing, and then when they get this thing, they have the anxious thought of, oh my God, how long will this good thing last? And then because of that anxious thought, they can't actually enjoy that good thing. And that's where gratitude becomes attachment, is that you have these good things, you enjoy them, you appreciate them, and then you become attached to them. So then you can't even enjoy it while it's there, because there's this anxiety that comes from the reality of impermanence. You're going to lose that thing eventually, or you can lose that thing, and then you become anxiously attached, and then you're like, oh my God, if I lose this, it's going to be tragic. So that's a problem. That's no good. So what is the difference between gratitude and attachment? Well, that is the difference. One, it's like there's this sense of inner peace and this continual sense of joy that comes from that thing, so long as it's in your life. And when it goes away, that's okay. Attachment is that there isn't a sense of peace, there's a sense of attachment, there's a sense of anxiety that almost comes from it, from losing that. And then it's almost like you want to push it away because you want to be rid of that anxiety, or you hold on to it too tightly, and then when it goes away, it's maybe not traumatizing, but it's devastating. So what do you do about that? Let's consult the note card. So in the video, I talked about gratitude and attachment months ago, if I even posted it. One of my conclusions was that gratitude is a state of being, whereas attachment is it kind of comes from the same place, because it's an appreciation of external things, but it's not a state of being. Instead, it's dependent on those external things. So where gratitude, it's something that you are whether you have an external thing or not. It's kind of like, I'm grateful for this external thing, whereas attachment becomes, I'm grateful because of this external thing. So maybe you have a really good friend group, and gratitude is kind of the acceptance that this friend group will go away at some point, and you'll be okay after that friend group goes away because you'll still have the ability to be grateful for other things. But attachment is, I get to feel these feelings of gratitude right now because I have this external thing. It's a very subtle difference, but the positive emotion is coming from something external as opposed to something within. And that thing within is always able to find something to extract positive emotion from externally, no matter the circumstances. However, attachment requires that external thing to be present in order to extract that positive emotion. I really hope that makes sense. That's what I think. So that's one thing, and I talked about that a while back, but here's the second thing, and this is how insecurity turns gratitude into attachment. So I think what can happen is we all have our insecurities and we all have our egos and our identities, and I've been kind of following this line of thinking recently that the ego is not wrong, right? I mean, that's kind of like the idea of ego is the enemy, is like, fuck the ego, it's a piece of shit, run from it, get it out of your life. And it's a great book, you should definitely read it. But I think we shouldn't see the ego as necessarily wrong or inherently bad, but instead as limited. And the problem with the ego is that it isn't necessarily lying to us. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's stopping us from reaching higher states, right? So the ego might be right that we're inferior to somebody in some way, and so we get locked in this state of negative emotion because, you know, it's like, hey man, like you're inferior here, and it's like, that fucking sucks. And then we kind of try to fight it. And what happens in this fight with the ego, when it tells us we're inferior in some way, it triggers those insecurities. It feels attacked, it gets defensive. What happens is, in that fight, we see something that we may be grateful for. Perhaps it's an accomplishment, perhaps it's a skill that we have, perhaps it's a person or a group of people in our life, perhaps it's being in good shape, perhaps it's pursuing goals, perhaps it's all these things that we get to experience that we could be grateful for. Instead, we attach to those things, we become prideful of them, and we use those as a defense mechanism for our insecurities. And I think as soon as something that we're grateful for becomes something that we use to defend ourselves against our insecurities, that thing becomes an attachment because we now need it to protect ourselves from the wave of negative emotion. So a great example of this is you're at family dinner, somebody's accomplished some great goal, achieved something fantastic, they're making a lot of money off of it perhaps, and perhaps you're sitting there and you're like, oh, well, they may be making all this money, but man, like, I am a morally righteous individual, look at all the self-sacrificing that I do, look at all the good things that I do, and it's like, you feel threatened by the accomplishment that this other person has had, and so you protect yourself from those insecurities rising, that sense of, oh wow, if they're accomplishing all these things, maybe you're inferior to them in some way. And we all, I mean, you have to have a degree of self-awareness, I guess, to actually be able to hear those thoughts, but those thoughts come, and there are a myriad of ways that we deal with those thoughts, and we'll go into that in a second. But when our ego, when our identity feels threatened, we look to something that we're grateful for, and we can use it as a way to defend ourselves from those negative emotions. All right, moving on. I think I got that point across. There's another point I was going into a second ago that was going to transition into. I don't know, I forgot. But I think that's another way. So there are kind of two ways that gratitude can become attachment. One is that we start practicing gratitude less as a way of being and more as a thing that's dependent on external circumstances or events or factors. And two, is that we use things that we should be grateful for as ways to defend our egos, or to defend ourselves from feelings of insecurity. So then how do you deal with those feelings of insecurity? So here's number 5, the ways that you might deal with those negative emotions. So as I was saying, you have to have a certain level of awareness, self-awareness, in order to recognize those thoughts. And those thoughts and emotions and feelings and ideas and beliefs, well, not really beliefs, come to the surface, and we deal with them in a series of ways. So there's suppression, repression, holding on / dwelling, expression, escape, letting it go, or letting it pass through. I think you could really like narrow those into a few more specific categories, but generally suppression tends to be the conscious pushing away of negative emotions or negative feelings. Repression tends to be the unconscious pushing away of negative emotions, negative feelings. Holding on / dwelling tends to be the feeling of those emotions and then grabbing onto them. Expression tends to be letting those feelings and emotions kind of like push you to do things and then letting go. All right, I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth and give a little bit more examples. So suppression is kind of like a thought comes up, it's not a very happy thought, you fight with it, right? And I think that's where we're looking right now, our suppression tactics. Repression happens unconsciously. That's where your mind kind of blocks those thoughts out for you. You don't get to recognize them, and a lot of times in order to bring those unconscious contents to the surface, when your mind is repressing them, you have to look at your dreams and you have to look really closely at your fantasies that kind of play in the back of your mind, and you look at your projections, and then you're able to determine, okay, what kind of unconscious contents am I repressing, not even becoming aware of. And we don't do that so much as consciously. And then dwelling, holding on, that's kind of like, when insecurity comes up or anger comes up, and repression is like you don't even notice that you're angry. You just go on an angry rampage, or you have all these angry thoughts, or you have all these self-righteous thoughts or moralistic thoughts where you're like, wow, they're a really bad person, and you don't even recognize that you're just an angry person, or that you're just stuck in this place of anger. Then, right, suppression might be the opposite, where you like argue with the anger, right? You argue with the thoughts of anger, and then holding on, dwelling, is where you kind of like dwell in that anger and you like feel that like self-righteous anger. You're like, yeah, like fuck that person, they're a real piece of shit. And then expression is where you actually go tell them that they're a real piece of shit, right? You let it out, you let it control you, you let it make you do things. And then escape is you drink it away or whatever, and then you go play video games. You don't want to fucking deal with it, so you just stimulate yourself so that you don't have to recognize that it's even there. And then letting go, letting it pass through, that's where you don't resist it, you don't hold on to it, you don't let it go make you do things, but instead you just let it come through you. It's like you let it come to the surface, you let it, whatever thoughts or ideas that come with it, you let those come through, you let the feelings come through. A lot of times, especially with insecurity, well, maybe not especially with insecurity, with really any emotion, there's kind of like this satisfying feeling you can get from it. And so, woe's me is a satisfying feeling, right? It's kind of like that feeling of victimization, or feeling, dwelling in your misery, right? It sounds ridiculous. Why would people want to dwell in their misery? But look at your own life and look at other people's lives with that in mind, and you'll see people dwelling in their misery fairly often. And it kind of, it feels good. There's some satisfaction that we get from it. I don't know why, but we do it. But letting it go, letting it pass through, is letting that emotion come to the surface, letting yourself feel it fully, and then it's almost like you do nothing. Because what happens so often is that comes to the surface, and then there are maybe fantasies that we want to act out, right? If you're really angry, all of a sudden, if you're afraid of anger, you're going to repress or suppress it. But if you let it come to the surface, then all of a sudden, it's like you feel that anger, and maybe you want to go like beat the shit out of your freaking wife or something. It's like, you shouldn't do that, man. That's first off illegal, and also doesn't generally lead to a healthy marriage. So instead, what you have to do is let that come to the surface. Then you're going to face that temptation, because every emotion, every negative emotion, well, maybe every emotion, but most negative emotions, when they come to the surface, they're going to present some kind of temptation. When that feeling comes, they're going to present some kind of temptation to act, and then that might lead into expression, and that might lead into unhealthy expression. And when you go act out that emotion, generally leads to some consequences further down the road. But if you can let that emotion come to the surface and then not give in to that temptation, then it's almost like you're letting it go, you're letting it pass through, and then you have whatever information or ideas came with it, right? Those are the thoughts that come with that emotion. And then when you have those thoughts, you can analyze them, and perhaps it's like, oh, hey, I'm angry at this person because they're being a real bitch, and so I need to go and have a rational conversation with them and see if, one, they can respect boundaries, or two, I need to push them out of my life, right? And you're not doing it from an angry place, you're doing it from a place of clarity. But that actual process of letting go, that actual process of letting it pass through you, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I think one thing that helps with that is meditation. I think another thing that helps with that is the understanding of the destructiveness of these emotions. So if you let anger drive your life, and you let anger be the force that makes you go and tell somebody off, then you're going to lose a lot of meaningful relationships. Whereas once that anger is passed, if you use that information that it's brought and you contemplate it and you choose a course of action from a place of peace, then you can go take action, communicate, conversate, and you're not going to unnecessarily push somebody out of your life, right? So that's dealing with anger. If we're now looking at insecurity, you could say, okay, well, fuck, I don't know. I haven't thought about insecurity in a very long time. It's an interesting one. Okay, well, the first thing is that you recognize that, okay, as it's coming up, and as you're going and looking for something that you would generally be grateful for, and you start using that as a defense, you need to look at that thing and think, do I want to be anxiously attached to this thing, to this person, belief? It could even be your beliefs, right? It can be ideas, and that's really dangerous, because our ideas and our beliefs are so core to the way that we live our life. If we attach ourselves to perhaps a wrong idea, or maybe even a limited idea, and most beliefs or ideas are going to be limited in some way, if we attach ourselves to that as a way to protect our insecurities, then in our strategic life, or in our thinking life, in our philosophical life, we become radically limited and unable to maneuver. So then, looking at, you're in conversation, this person, you think they're better than them, then you think they're better than you in some way, and so you need to defend yourself. So you take a belief and you protect yourself, or you take I have this great social life, and you protect yourself with that. That creates that emotional attachment to that thing. When you have that awareness that those thoughts, that grabbing of the thing that you should be grateful for and protecting yourself with it, I think as soon as you become aware that that's what you're doing, that you're using a suppression tactic, and that by using that suppression tactic, you're poisoning the experience of gratitude that you could have for this thing, and you're poisoning the experience that you could have with this thing, then you're going to take that thing, you go, okay, no, I'm not going to defend myself with that. And then you're going to get hit with the full blunt of insecurity, or the full force of insecurity, or those feelings, or those thoughts. And then that's a whole other beast. And then maybe that's where the next thing that you might want to do is dwell in your misery. Be like, oh, woe is me. You want to go drink it away, or you want to go escape because now you're overwhelmed with these negative feelings, or you want to go express it somehow. I don't know, go complain to somebody. Be like, oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. I don't know. Have a pity party. That's what you want to do. You want to have a pity party, whatever. You got to not do that. You got to say like, no, I don't want to have a fucking pity party for myself. I don't want to sit here and rationalize or victimize myself. I don't want to sit here and think about like, oh, well, maybe they have that, but like, I have this, or, oh, well, I don't have that because of this, this, and this. And so you make excuses But perhaps if you can get into a meditative state where those feelings are able to pass through and you're able to look at those thoughts as if they're just clouds passing the sky, you can say, hey, do some of these thoughts have utility? And maybe you could recognize, like, well, let's look at the way that I've lived my life. I've lived my life in such a way that I wouldn't get the thing that they have. Maybe somebody's in really good shape and it's like you feel like a real piece of shit because you're not in as good of shape as them. Then you might think, okay, well, is this something I actually value? Perhaps you're playing basketball and they're like kicking your ass and you're like, damn, they're really like kicking me out, and you feel hella insecure all of a sudden. It's like you just think to yourself, okay, that feeling comes up, you let it pass through, you see those thoughts, you say, okay, well, it's saying you're a piece of shit because you're not as good at basketball as them. Do I really? You don't fight that with, oh, they might be good at basketball, but I'm good at freaking tennis. And then you're attached to the skill that you have at tennis, and then you become prideful about it, and then you become arrogant and all that kind of that stuff. Your identity gets attached to it, all that kind of stuff. And something my buddy and I figured out the other week is you can't value the things that your value is in. So if your identity is tied to something, then you're not going to be able to experience it in as positive a way than if your identity wasn't tied to it. And I can make a whole other video about that, but your identity will then get attached to your tennis skills, and then you'll be like, oh, see, I'm not so bad. But really all that you're doing is sheltering yourself from insecurity. But instead what you need to do is say, like, okay, hey, there's the thought, you're a piece of shit because you're less good at basketball than them. And you take that thought, you go, okay, do I really believe that? And if it's like, yeah, you find it compelling to some degree, then it's like maybe you really value your basketball skills. And then maybe it's like, okay, well, I'll go get better at basketball. But then perhaps you'll have to say, but am I necessarily a piece of shit because I'm not as good at basketball as them? Or should I just interpret this as, I would like to be better at basketball. I would like to engage in basketball in a different way. I would like to be able to, be competitive with people instead of just get my ass whooped every time. That's a value assessment. If you value it, then make a change in that regard. And then let go of the idea that you're a piece of shit or not a piece of shit based on your basketball skills, because that's just ridiculous. And then that can be extrapolated to things regarding finances, regarding relationships, regarding family life, regarding your personality, your sense of humor, your skills, your habits, your hobbies, your whatever else, your career. I mean, shit, Of course, basketball might seem more trivial than those other things, but it's all just, it's all the same shit, different toilet. Ultimately, I think the principle applies to all these things. Anyway, so I don't know if any of that made sense. I really hope it did. Those are my thoughts. If anybody watches this, get up here, you little freaking guy. If anyone watches this, let me know. Be like, dude, none of that made sense, because I think I speak in a relatively bizarre way sometimes. But perhaps it did make sense. Perhaps it didn't. It made sense to me. Kind of. Yeah. Bye-bye.